Before we start, I want to say that only 1% of you are subscribed. Please subscribe because at 1,000 subscribers, I will post a special video for you.
The Galactic Assembly Hall was a breathtaking structure, designed to reflect the unity of the galaxy's countless civilizations. Its vaulted ceiling sparkled with holographic constellations, while its marble-like floor seemed to stretch endlessly, symbolizing the shared aspirations of peace and cooperation. For humanity, however, the grandeur was a bitter reminder of their place as outsiders in this league of ancient powers. Ambassador Jackson Vren stood at his assigned seat, located at the far end of the chamber. It was a placement that said everything about humanity's status. While the great empires of the galaxy, the Lorati, the Trellarans, the Vorvani, occupied central positions, humanity was relegated to the fringes, a courtesy seat given to a species deemed inexperienced and insignificant. Today's session was supposed to be routine. Delegates from across the galaxy had gathered to discuss trade disputes, resource allocation, and other pressing issues. But for Jackson, it was anything but routine. He was here to demand accountability for the latest insult to humanity's dignity, the blockade of Jora 7, one of Earth's oldest and most prosperous colonies. When the moment came, Jackson rose from his seat and walked to the central podium. His sharp features betrayed no emotion, but inside, he could feel the weight of centuries of frustration pressing down on him. Every human delegate before him had faced the same sneers, the same dismissive attitudes, and every one of them had chosen patience. Jackson wasn't sure he could do the same. "Esteemed members of the Assembly," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I stand before you today on behalf of humanity, a species that has upheld the principles of this Assembly for over a century. We have contributed to its projects, adhered to its laws, and sought peaceful resolutions to every conflict. Yet once again, we find ourselves the target of unwarranted aggression." The room was silent for a moment, the delegates watching him with varying degrees of interest. Then, from the center of the chamber, a deep, gravelly voice broke the silence. "Unwarranted aggression," said High Warden Lothrak, the Lorati representative. He rose to his full height, towering over most of the other delegates. His gold-plated armor glinted under the chamber's lights, and his piercing eyes locked onto Jackson with thinly veiled disdain. "What you call aggression, Ambassador Vren, we call maintaining stability. Your colony's location near Lorati space is a provocation. It is only natural for us to take precautions." Jackson's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Jora 7 is a peaceful settlement. Its trade routes have operated without incident for decades. Your blockade is an act of economic warfare, one that has left countless humans stranded and starving." Lothrak sneered. "Perhaps your people should have considered the risks before expanding so recklessly. The Lorati Empire will not tolerate threats, no matter how insignificant." The word insignificant echoed in Jackson's ears, louder than anything else Lothrak had said. He clenched his fists beneath the podium, feeling the weight of centuries of slights and humiliations. Even now, as he stood in this so-called Hall of Unity, he could feel the disdain radiating from the other delegates. To them, humanity was little more than an inconvenience, a young and brash species punching above its weight. From the Trellaran delegation, a serpentine figure uncoiled, its scales shimmering under the lights. Representative Thresik spoke in a voice like a low hiss. "Ambassador Vren, perhaps you mistake caution for aggression. The Lorati Empire's actions are unfortunate, yes, but surely you understand the complexities of interstellar politics." Jackson turned his gaze to Thresik, his voice sharpening. "I understand this. If the roles were reversed, and it were a Lorati or Trellaran colony under siege, this assembly would demand immediate action. Yet when it's humanity, you call for patience." The room murmured in response. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably, but most remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Jackson continued, his voice rising slightly. "For decades, humanity has abided by your rules. We have swallowed every insult, every slight, because we believed in the ideals this assembly represents. But how much longer do you expect us to endure this hypocrisy? How much longer do you think we will tolerate being treated as lesser?" The murmurs grew louder, but Jackson pressed on. "Jora 7 is not just a colony. It is a symbol of humanity's determination, our resilience. And I am here to tell you, we will not allow it to fall. If this assembly refuses to act, then humanity will take matters into its own hands." Lothrak let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Take matters into your own hands? What could your fledgling species possibly do against the might of the Lorati Empire?" Jackson stepped closer to the podium, his eyes locked on Lothrax. "We may be young, but we are not weak. And if you think you can push us forever without consequence, High Warden, you are gravely mistaken." The hall fell into stunned silence. For a moment, Jackson's words hung in the air like a thundercloud, charged and ready to strike. Then the session was adjourned, the delegates dispersing in a flurry of whispers and sidelong glances. As Jackson walked back to his seat, his aide, Sarah Lynn, leaned in close. "That was bold," she whispered. "But do you think they'll take us seriously?" Jackson glanced back at the podium, his mind replaying Lothrax's sneer, the dismissive hisses of Thresik. "No," he said quietly. "But they will." He looked up at the holographic display of Earth in the assembly foyer, its familiar blue and green hues a stark contrast to the cold indifference of the chamber. For the first time, Jackson felt the faint stirrings of something that had long been dormant in humanity's dealings with the galaxy. Resolve. They had waited long enough. The blockade of Jora 7 was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of decades of dismissive behavior, territorial overreach, and outright hostility from the Lorati Empire and other dominant powers in the Galactic Assembly. For humanity, it was the final straw. News of the blockade spread like wildfire across Earth and its colonies. Images of stranded cargo ships, starving colonists, and Lorati warships enforcing the embargo-filled screens everywhere. Protests erupted in cities, and the unified cry was clear: enough was enough. In the assembly hall, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Jackson Vren stood at the podium again, but this time, he wasn't just addressing the usual crowd of indifferent delegates. Behind him, a live broadcast connected the chamber to billions of human citizens across the galaxy. The world was watching. 2 weeks ago, Jackson began, his voice carrying the weight of his fury. Jora 7 was cut off from the rest of humanity. Thousands of colonists are starving. Entire families are dying because the Lorati Empire has decided they can act with impunity. And what has the Assembly done? He paused, letting the silence underline the lack of action. "Nothing," he said, his voice colder now. "Not a single resolution, not a single rebuke. Instead, you tell us to be patient, to negotiate, to accept what has been done to us. Well, I'm here to tell you that humanity's patience has run out." The murmurs began immediately, hushed voices of alarm and disbelief. A few delegates tried to interject, but Jackson pressed on. "For decades, humanity has played by your rules. We've followed every law, respected every treaty, and waited for the respect we were promised. But respect isn't given in this assembly, it's taken. And starting today, humanity will take what it is owed." From the central seating area, High Warden Lothrak rose, his towering frame a clear attempt to intimidate. "Your words border on insolence, Ambassador," he rumbled. "Do not forget your place." Jackson turned to face him, his expression unwavering. "Our place? We built our colonies from nothing. We crossed the void of space with technology we created ourselves. Every step we've taken has been earned, while empires like yours leech off the work of others and call it tradition." Lothrak's golden eyes flared with anger. "Do you dare threaten the Lorati Empire?" Jackson's lips curled into a cold smile. "It's not a threat, High Warden. It's a warning." The room erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, some calling for calm, others demanding sanctions against humanity. Jackson remained still, his gaze sweeping the chamber, taking in the panic and outrage. Then, a new voice rang out, sharp and calculated. It was Representative Thresik of the Trellarans, coiling forward with practiced elegance. "Ambassador Vren, this escalation will only lead to suffering, for your people most of all. Surely you understand that you cannot stand against the combined might of the Assembly." Jackson met Thresik's gaze, his voice steady. "You assume we'll stand alone. Humanity has allies, not in treaties, but in ideas. In resilience. In the millions who have grown tired of being dismissed and exploited. We may be young, but we've learned from every slight, every betrayal. If you think we will break, you've underestimated us." Thresik tilted their head, the shimmering scales on their neck catching the light. "Bravado is not a strategy, Ambassador." "No," Jackson said, his tone hard. "But survival is." He stepped back from the podium, leaving the delegates in stunned silence. The session adjourned with no resolution, and as the assembly dispersed, murmurs of uncertainty filled the air. In the private human quarters, Jackson met with his aide, Sarah Lynn, and Admiral Aaron Klein, the the commanding officer of Earth's First Fleet. The broadcast reached every colony, Sarah said, her voice laced with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The people are rallying. Protests are turning into movements. They're ready to fight. Admiral Klein nodded. The fleet is mobilized. We can be in the Jora system within 72 hours. But this won't just be about the Lorati. Once we retaliate, the entire assembly will likely move against us. Jackson sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. But if we don't act now, we'll lose Jora 7, and our credibility forever. We have to show them that humanity isn't just a collection of colonies to be bullied. We're a force. A nation. Admiral Klein placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder. Then we do what must be done. No half measures. If we strike hard. Jackson nodded, his resolve solidifying. Make the preparations. Humanity is done waiting for permission. As the admiral left to oversee the fleet's deployment, Sarah stayed behind, her expression thoughtful. They'll fight back, she said quietly. The assembly, the Lorati, maybe even the Trellerans. This could escalate into a full-scale war. Jackson looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. Then let them fight. We've been underestimated for too long. It's time to remind them what we're capable of. In the void of space, humanity's fleet began to move, a silent storm gathering strength. The galaxy had pushed humanity to its breaking point. Now, it would learn the cost of awakening a force it had spent centuries dismissing. The Jora 7 blockade was no more. The first human fleet, sleek and bristling with weaponry, had swept into the system like a storm. The Lorati warships that had guarded the colony's perimeter were reduced to debris in a matter of hours, their defenses crumbling under the precision and firepower of humanity's cutting-edge technology. The Lorati, accustomed to being the aggressors, were caught completely off guard by the sheer efficiency of the human attack. From the bridge of his flagship, HSS Resolute, Admiral Aaron Klein watched the remnants of the Lorati blockade drift aimlessly. Status report, he ordered. Enemy fleet neutralized, his tactical officer replied. Minimal human casualties. The colony reports that relief supplies are being delivered as we speak. Good, Klein said, his voice grim. Relay a message to the fleet, hold position and prepare for counterattacks. This isn't over. In the heart of the colony, Ambassador Jackson Vren stood on the ground, watching as supply ships descended to deliver food, medicine, and vital equipment to the starving colonists. The once thriving settlement had been battered by weeks of isolation, but hope was returning with every crate unloaded. One of the colonists, a weary woman with hollow eyes, approached Jackson. Thank you, she said simply, her voice cracking with emotion. Jackson nodded, his jaw tightening. You shouldn't have had to endure this. But we did, she said, a flicker of steel in her tone. And we survived. That's what humans do, isn't it? Jackson couldn't help but smile faintly. Yes. That's exactly what we do. The Lorati response came sooner than expected. Hours after the blockade's destruction, a massive Lorati fleet entered the system. Their ships were larger and more heavily armed than the initial blockade force, and their commander, High Marshal Gorath, wasted no time sending a transmission to the human fleet. The hologram of Gorath appeared on the bridge of the Resolute, his golden eyes blazing with fury. Admiral Klein, he snarled. You have committed an act of war. Withdraw your fleet immediately, or face annihilation. Klein remained calm, his hands clasped behind his back. Your forces attacked a peaceful colony and blockaded innocent civilians. Humanity acted in self-defense. The only party guilty of war crimes here is you. Gorath's expression twisted into a sneer. Self-defense? Your species is a pest that has infested our space for too long. We allowed you to exist because you were insignificant. But now, you've overstepped your bounds. Klein's eyes narrowed. If you want a fight, High Marshal, you'll get one. But don't expect us to play the role of victims anymore. The transmission ended abruptly, and moments later, the Lorati fleet advanced. The ensuing battle was a clash of tactics and brute force. The Lorati fleet, with its massive dreadnoughts and swarms of fighters, bore down on the human lines like an unstoppable tide. But humanity had learned to adapt. Their ships were faster, more agile, and equipped with weapons designed to exploit the vulnerabilities of the Lorati vessels. From the bridge of the Resolute, Klein coordinated the counteroffensive. Focus fire on their flagship, he ordered. Break their chain of command. Human destroyers darted through the chaos, targeting key Lority ships with precision strikes. The flagship, Ironclad Zenith, took heavy damage as waves of torpedoes breached its shields. Meanwhile, human cruisers provided cover for the colony, ensuring no stray fire reached the civilians below. Jackson watched the battle unfold from the surface, his heart pounding with every explosion in the sky. He had fought for this, pushed humanity to take a stand, but the stakes had never felt more real. A colonist standing beside him whispered, "Do you think we can win?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "We have to." The turning point came when Admiral Klein deployed humanity's secret weapon, the Sentinel-class dreadnoughts. These massive ships, hidden from the galaxy until now, were the pinnacle of human ingenuity. Armed with experimental plasma lances and adaptive shielding, they tore through the Lority fleet like predators among prey. The ironclad Zenith exploded in a fiery blaze, taking with it High Marshal Gorath and the remaining cohesion of the Lority forces. What was left of their fleet scattered, retreating into hyperspace. Cheers erupted across the human fleet and the colony below. Humanity had not only survived but triumphed against one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. Hours later, Jackson stood in the command center of the colony, reviewing the aftermath. The Lorathi's defeat had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Reports were already coming in that other species were reconsidering their treatment of humanity. Admiral Klein entered, his uniform crisp despite the long battle. "It's done," he said simply. "For now," Jackson replied. "But the Assembly won't stay silent. They'll paint us as aggressors. They'll say we're dangerous." Klein smirked. "Let them. They're not wrong." Jackson allowed himself a rare smile. "No, they're not. And maybe it's time they realized it." The stars above Jora 7 were clear again, free of enemy ships. But in the distance, humanity's fleet remained vigilant, ready for the inevitable retaliation. For the first time, humanity had shown its teeth, and the galaxy would never forget. The aftermath of the battle over Jora 7 reverberated across the galaxy like a shockwave. News of humanity's decisive victory against the Lority fleet spread to every corner of the Assembly's influence. The once dismissive whispers about humanity now turned into uneasy murmurs of respect, and in some cases fear. In the Galactic Assembly Hall, the mood was tense. Delegates from every major species had gathered for an emergency session to address humanity's actions. The air was thick with unease, a sharp contrast to the usual atmosphere of arrogance and self-importance. At the center of the chamber, Jackson Vren stood at the podium, his expression calm but his presence commanding. Behind him, a live feed displayed images of the battle, Lority dreadnoughts disintegrating under human firepower, the Sentinel-class dreadnoughts carving through enemy fleets, and Jora VII's colonists raising the human flag in triumph. "The galaxy has changed," Jackson began, his voice steady but unyielding. "For decades, humanity endured your insults, your exploitation, and your indifference. We were patient because we believed in the ideals this assembly was founded on, ideals of cooperation, fairness, and mutual respect. But your actions have made it clear that those ideals only apply to some." The room was silent, the delegates hanging on his every word. Even the usually dismissive High Warden Lothrak of the Lority sat stiffly in his seat, his golden armor dulled by shame and defeat. "When Jora 7 was attacked, this assembly did nothing," Jackson continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "When we called for justice, you laughed. But humanity is done waiting for your approval. We will no longer beg for recognition or fairness. We will take what is ours, our dignity, our sovereignty, and our place among the stars." The silence broke as Representative Thresik of the Trellarans hissed from their platform. "Your actions have destabilized an entire region of space, Ambassador. You have provoked not just the Lority, but the entire Assembly. Do you truly believe humanity can stand against all of us?" Jackson turned to Thresik, his expression cold. "We didn't provoke the Assembly. The Assembly provoked us, again and again, until we had no choice but to act. And yes, Representative, we believe we can stand against you. Because unlike you, we fight for more than power. We fight for our people, for our survival, and for a future where no species, human or otherwise, is treated as lesser." Thresik recoiled slightly, their forked tongue flicking nervously. From the back of the chamber, an unexpected voice spoke. It was Envoy Kolresh of the Vorvani, a quiet species known for their pragmatism. "Perhaps the Assembly should reflect on its own role in creating this conflict," Kolresh said, their tone measured. "Humanity has demonstrated strength and resilience. Maybe it's time we reconsider how we treat them, and each other. The statement sent ripples of unease through the room. Some delegates nodded subtly, while others bristled at the suggestion. Later, in the privacy of Humanity's assembly quarters, Jackson met with Admiral Aaron Klein and Sarah Lynn. The tension of the chamber had not yet left their faces, but there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. The Vorvani support was unexpected, Sarah said, pacing the room. If others follow their lead, it could change everything. It's a start, Jackson replied, leaning against the table. But don't think for a second that the assembly is done testing us. They'll try to box us in, paint us as aggressors, even isolate us if they can. Klein nodded. Let them try. The fleet is stronger than ever, and Jora 7 proved we can back up our words with action. The galaxy knows better than to underestimate us now. Jackson looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the stars. This was never just about Jora 7. It's about sending a message. Humanity won't be ignored anymore. Not by the assembly, not by the Lorati, not by anyone. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to shift. While some species condemned humanity's actions, others began reaching out in quiet support, intrigued by their defiance and resourcefulness. Trade agreements were forged in secret, alliances hinted at in coded messages. The Lorati, humiliated and weakened, withdrew from several contested regions, their influence waning under the weight of their defeat. High Warden Lothrak, once so full of arrogance, avoided the assembly altogether. Humanity, once dismissed as a fledgling species, had forced the galaxy to see them in a new light. Their actions had shattered the old power dynamics, and the assembly could no longer ignore the force they had become. Months later, Jackson stood aboard the HSS Resolute, looking out at a vast formation of human ships. It was a sight that filled him with pride and resolve. "Admiral," he said, turning to Klein, "where do we stand?" "The fleet is ready," Klein replied. "We've solidified our defenses across all colonies. If anyone challenges us again, they'll find we're more than prepared." Jackson nodded, his gaze returning to the stars. "Good. But let's hope it doesn't come to that." Sarah, standing nearby, smiled faintly. "Do you really think they'll leave us alone after this?" "No," Jackson admitted. "But now, they'll think twice before testing us again." The galaxy had learned a harsh lesson. Humanity's patience was not infinite. And when it snapped, the consequences were unforgettable. As the Resolute prepared to depart, Jackson allowed himself a moment of reflection. Humanity had taken its place among the stars, not through begging or diplomacy, but through sheer determination and unyielding strength. No species would ever forget the moment humanity's patience finally snapped. And no species would ever dare to test it again.